Hi, friends. You are listening to the EntreEd Talk podcast, where we feature amazing educators and entrepreneurs showcasing how you can bring entrepreneurship into the classroom. We believe entrepreneurship is for everyone. I am your host, Toy Hirschman, and I am so glad you chose to join me on this journey. Let's go. Welcome back, everybody, to an exciting episode of the EntreEd Talk podcast. I am delighted to have with me today Thane Marcus Ringler. Thane is a former professional golfer turned speaker, writer, and development coach living in Denver, Colorado with his wife, Evan. In his current work, Thane's mission is to help others live and work better. He is passionate about speaking to the journey from the journey and striving to empower this generation to take ownership of their lives and never settle for less than they're capable of. Thane is also the host of the Up and Comers Show, a podcast all about the process of becoming and living with intentionality while sharing stories from other inspiring up and comers along the way. Check out that show for sure, folks. Welcome, Thane. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Toy. I'm excited for this time together and this fun conversation we're about to have.
Yes. This is cool. And I had a chance to chat with Thane a little bit beforehand, and you guys are in for a treat. So I'm not going to say anymore. Your story is so interesting, just where you were and where you are. It's just amazing. So can you elaborate a little bit more on my introduction and share your own journey with our audience?
Yeah, life is a very winding road. There's no straight path to anyone's journey, and that's definitely true for my own. I played golf my whole life, starting at a young age, had a lot of natural talent and motivation to succeed, driven by a hyper competitiveness. And so being competitive and wanting to win, I really gravitated towards the sport of golf. As I could control all the results. I didn't have to rely on teammates or coaches or referees. I could just take ownership of it all, which as a kid and being a little bit ignorant, you think it's a great thing. But the older you get, the more you realize that's taking ownership, not just for the successes, but more often for the failures. And, it was a great sport to learn and grow throughout my childhood. And as I got better, it became clear that playing collegiately would be the goal. And then beyond that was even an opportunity or possibility. I remember my dad being excited about that in high school and me being like, there's a lot of steps before we get there. But as I continued to progress and as I continued to grow, it became more and more of a reality that could be possible. And as I entered my senior year in college, I ended up forming a business plan around myself and raised investment and was able to pursue professional golf for 4 years. And it didn't lead to the place I thought it would. I thought it may lead to the PGA Tour. That was the goal. I did not reach the PGA Tour, but what it did lead me to is a pivot. And now I work with people, humans, on human development, how we develop as humans in personal and professional ways. And it's been a pretty winding road to get here. So that's kind of a snapshot overview of the path.
That is so great. I know that we talk to a lot of really cool entrepreneurs, and I gotta say, I think everybody's got this crazy path, which makes me feel better because mine's a little crazy too.
Mm-hmm. We all are crazy. We share that.
Well, I love how you took your personal experience and now you're able to coach and help people find their own way and find their own, their own why. So you talked about, you had ownership over your golf and that was cool. I was a swimmer. And so it was kind of the same.
Yeah.
I didn't get as far as you did though, but, who supported you as you were going through this transition into, you were kind of already an entrepreneur as an athlete, but going into this transition as a coach and writer, we're going to get into all of that and all of the cool things that you're doing now.
Yeah. It was a really interesting process. So my last year and a half of playing professionally, I had a muscle strain in my back that repeated about 5 times over that year and a half. And so I was off and on with competing, wasn't able to do my profession or my work in that sense. And during that time, I ended up diversifying my interests. I started podcasts, like you mentioned, the Up and Comer Show with a buddy. And then I also started looking into other ways to use my time well. And as I was unsure about whether or not I'd be able to compete from a body standpoint physically, I really wanted to think of ways that I could pay back my investors for what they'd given me in this pursuit of golf. If I can't do that financially, what could that be? And as I thought on that, I thought, what if I wrote a book about how these experiences made me a better man, and gift that to them and say, this is what you've given me. So that was the original idea of my first book. And during one of those injury recovery times, I decided, you know what, God's giving me the space. I'm going to dive full in onto this. And so I puked out the rough draft. And then 18 months later, it turned into my first book. And so that process of writing and making sense of what that journey of golf and the experience of playing professionally had done for me, that process really set the trajectory for what was to come. And it used that time where I was kind of in limbo. It used that time well, so that when it was time to make the decision, whether it be golf or something else, I was ready to start moving forward on whatever that other path may be. And as I sat with it, the other thing I'll say is that I really sat with the question, who have I been created, equipped, and called to be? And I love this question because it's kind of a holistic self-examination. Who have I been created to be is our natural inclinations or talents that we've been given at birth. We're just kind of naturally gifted at. Equipped is, what have my life experiences given me up to this point? How are they unique to me in my journey, and how can they provide value to others? And then called is that passion, that burn, that fire within us that just won't die, that motivation that's underlying what we want to do in the world. And when I sat with that and thought on that and prayed and meditated and sought counsel for several months, it became clear that I could be more effective outside the world of golf than within it based on that answer. And so that led to me deciding to pivot. And through the process of writing, I was making sense of what that experience had given me. And knowing myself and having a lot of internal motivation, not needing other people to motivate me, I really wanted to dive into the entrepreneurial journey to see if I could find my own way in that path. And that launched me on this crazy 4-year journey since. And it led to me becoming a development coach and building a practice on that along with the other things. And so that is, it's a windy road, as you mentioned, and that's part of my journey.
Wow. I love that. Who have I been created, equipped, and called to be?
Mm-hmm.
That is so cool. And you are not a very old person. So
yeah.
It's really neat that you have been able to figure this out so quickly. So, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you. So it's, it's really neat to hear that you've been able to do that and find that. Cause I think most people at all ages are still kind of searching for those three things, because we don't always know what they are. We had a cool guest one time that he actually works. It was like the boomers and millennials. And like he bridges this gap. Is really, really interesting how there's so many similarities that we don't think about.
Yeah. And just to follow that up, I don't think I've found it in the sense of arrived at a destination. I really don't think we do arrive at a final destination in life. We're constantly reaching to new destinations. And so when I think about my journey, I'm making sense of where I'm at, but I'm still figuring it out alongside everyone else. And I think the answer to that question will shift and change as we go through life, because we are shifting and changing as humans. That means we're growing, right? If we're human, that means, and if we're alive, that means we're either growing or decaying, and it's somewhere in between. There's never a stagnant place that we stay at. And so I really, I definitely don't have it all figured out, and I'm definitely still learning each step of the way.
Well, that's very, very true. We all are. I mean, who knows? Corporate attorney might be in your future. You never know.
Yeah, you never know. Maybe you just spoke it into existence,
Derby who knows?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I love the title of your newest book. It's called Catalysts for Hope. I love the term catalyst. I like chemistry. But that's just a really pretty title. You explore that idea of hope. I'm wondering if you could talk about what that means and what inspired you to write that book.
Yeah, for sure. This last year, as we all know, is pretty challenging for everyone. It was filled with a lot of unforeseen challenges, and it affected all of us. And in times where we are struggling or facing obstacles that seem insurmountable, oftentimes we can feel hopeless, like there isn't hope, right? And I really strongly believe, as a deep conviction, that hope can always be found wherever we are, wherever we find ourselves, if only we'd look for it or seek it out. And I think my goal with the book is to create more hope-filled or hopeful people, because hope is a great catalyst. If we can catalyze more hope, it can catalyze us in our daily lives and in our work and what we're trying to do in the world. And so in the book, I just share 4 simple perspective shifts that can reframe how we see our current lives or where we find ourselves, that can really unlock a lot of hope in our lives. That will be the fuel that keeps us moving forward, even when the times are tough. And really, like, if you think about perspective, right? When we are looking at each other in the screen and we see one perspective of the room, but the other perspective of the room that we don't see is what's on the other side of the screen, right? We don't see the other half of the room. When nothing has changed, it's just a different perspective. And so it's just to say that wherever you're at, there's always a different perspective to find. And if we find ourselves in a hopeless place, we can often fill it with hope by looking from a different perspective.
That's awesome. Can you share what the 4 shifts are?
Speaking of the 4 catalysts, the first one, they're all P's. The first one's in process. So the fact that we are all in process means that we're not finished yet. And every single day we are in process. We're still growing. We're not at a final destination. And that gives a lot of hope, because we still have work to do and there's still progress to be made. And that's a part of being human, which I think is really, really hope-filling. The second one is progress. The fact that progress happens by baby steps. It doesn't happen in giant leaps and bounds. It happens by taking one single step every day. And that's something that every one of us can do. We can all make progress every single day. The third is possibility. By living in and leaning into possibility, we can unlock more of our potential. Instead of just thinking about what is, we can think about what can be, what is possible in our day and in our work and in our lives. And then the fourth is purpose. When we can live attached and aligned to the purpose, to our calling, whatever that may be, we can infuse hope into every single part of our day, because everything matters. Everything plays a part. It serves a role. And I think that just by simple perspective shifts and utilizing those, we can really unlock a lot of hope.
That's really beautiful. I wrote those down. Those are really cool. That is so cool. I love the idea of baby steps. Mm-hmm. I read Brene Brown, and she kind of talks about that a little bit. And Mel Robbins talks about that on her TED Talk. Like just make one piece of progress towards something that that you want, and then see what happens next. And it's really a cool idea, because it makes these big, I want to write a book. Well, that's really big, but I'm going to write a page.
Yeah.
And so that's really cool.
And, just to speak to that for a second, I think as humans, we all secretly think that the key to success or to achieving success in life is finding a way to jump to the 10th step, finding a way to shortcut the path so we can arrive at the 10th step sooner. And the reality is, if we take a shortcut or we try to jump or leap to this 10th step, we're not going to be prepared for that place that we find ourselves in. And that will crash and burn and cause pain for us and those around us. And so we have these misperceptions of how we develop and what's actually sustainable for us. And there really aren't any shortcuts in life. So if we can remind ourselves that it takes 9 steps to get to the 10th step, then we can embrace that today I'm just going to take 1 step instead of trying to jump to the 10th.
I love that. And the 10th step might look a little bit different once you finally get there.
Yes, inevitably it will, 100%.
That's awesome. And you talk about coaching. Do you coach through your courses that we're going to talk about those, or do you do any one-on-one coaching? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I have a development coaching practice that is individuals mainly. I am expanding this year into more team settings, which will be a fun process. But typically what it looks like is I follow a framework that is applied in the sense of giving some structure or direction, but it's different per individual. And the framework, I call it coaching, consulting, creating. It's a 3-fold framework where the coaching side deals more with the vision, vision casting and determining the identity, the core identity of the person that we're working with, the client. And so once we get clear about the identity, the vision of where we're heading, things that are preventing us, things that may prevent us in the future, and what the steps may look like, once we kind of cast that and get clear about that, we can start living more aligned and attached with that, which is ultimately living with integrity. It's being the person you say you are, who you want to be. And we all struggle with this as humans. There's no shame or guilt in any of that. It's just recognizing where we aren't living with integrity and understanding the factors that produce that, and then working on realigning with that identity so that we can be living with full integrity. So that's a lot of the first process in coaching. Consulting deals much more with the daily life of saying, okay, in the day-to-day, the week-to-week of our lives, what are the things, what are the parts of our day, what are the aspects of our environment that are standing in the way or causing us to not fulfill or live out with integrity? And so that could be bad habits, that could be environmental things that we can change or curate. It could be maybe a wrong mindset as we approach things. And so that's a lot of discovery of how we're handling and understanding ourselves in day-to-day situations. And then the creating phase involves a lot more of the strategic problem solving of saying there's this goal, this vision in front of me, but what are the specific steps and how do we take as few as steps as possible, just to be smart about moving forward in this and strategize together on that. So that's kind of the rough framework. But again, it does look different on every client. And it's really a journey. A lot of my role as a coach is to provide a mirror. So the person that I'm working with can see themselves more clearly and better understand what's motivating them, what's standing in the way, what some of those self-limiting beliefs or fears are that keep us in a circular pattern versus a trajectory towards where we want to be. So that's a lot of it is objectivity and accountability, holding them to the commitments they make.
Wow, that's wonderful. Too bad I don't live in Denver. Speaking of which, for those people who don't live in Denver or close to be able to come get to you, not that anybody gets anywhere in person,
Mm-hmm.
You have a couple of courses that really sound like a good time. Can you talk about those a little bit?
I haven't heard of many people say that discipline sounds like a good time, but
Well, if I could get more, that would be a really good thing. But
Yeah.
they just sound really cool.
Yeah, I love that. And just to speak to the coaching, nowadays with the era we live in, most of my coaching is done virtually. So even for people that don't live in Denver, if you are interested, definitely reach out and start a conversation. Would love to talk and see if it's a good fit. But for people that want something that's a little more self-directed, these online courses are built for that. They're at a lower price point, so they're a little more affordable, and they are going to be self-directed. So I've provided all the curriculum and the lessons and the assignments, but you can go at your own pace. And they are around developing discipline and then growing self-awareness. And I came to these two things over the last 3 to 4 years of working with individuals in the coaching space and just thinking about what is it that I'm passionate about or driven towards or wanting to create more of in the world. And really it comes down to self-leadership. I really want to create more self-leaders, and that's for myself and for others. If I can't lead myself well, then I can't lead others well. And that's true for all of us. So we have to start with leading ourselves well in order to be sustainably and consistently leading others well. And I really think that the two core competencies of good self-leaders are self-awareness and discipline. And so they're both 8-week courses that take people through the process and show them the tools involved in that while providing an understanding of the importance of it and some ideas around it.
That sounds it still sounds fun to me. I need a lot of discipline. I need help.
Discipline is hard. And that's the thing about discipline is I think a lot of times there's, for some people, internal opposition to discipline. It's saying when they hear discipline, they kind of cringe because as kids, we often first learn about discipline in a negative connotation. We get punished or consequences for something we did. And that's discipline, So we grow up associating it in a negative way. So a lot of the work of adults is just realizing that it's actually a really good thing. It's really beneficial, and it's something that we should pursue, not kind of avoid. and so that's part of it. And the other side of it is it doesn't happen by chance. Discipline never happens by chance. We never default into discipline. And so we have to, and discipline, I think the definition of what it is simply effort and intention. It's a reason why we're doing what we're doing and applying the effort to do it. So it's a pretty simple definition, but it helps us understand that it won't just happen.
That's so true. It's funny too how people can be disciplined, have this great level of self-discipline in some areas of their life and then not in others. When you were talking, I was thinking like, I work out every day.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, but I do.
Yeah.
But then in other areas, like when I need to be doing something and I turn on the TV instead, it's kind of funny how that works. I imagine though, too, that growing the self-awareness part first would kind of leads into having more self-discipline automatically because you're more in tune with I'm going to read it again. Where's the quote? You're more in tune with who am I created, equipped, and called to be?
Yeah.
So
I agree. I think they both fuel each other. They really do. Like, I think they're complementary in that getting better at one it improves you at the other. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm gonna have to check those out in more detail. I sort of checked them out already, but maybe I'll join one.
Yeah, join in. That'd be a lot of fun.
So your podcast, the Up and Coming Show, this sounds amazing. It kind of tells you in the title what it's about, but what kind of folks do you seek out to interview, and what does the structure of your podcast look like? Because like this podcast is kind of a lawless country, right? We're just I'm curious about other podcasts and how you've structured that.
Yeah. So I loved podcasts. When I was playing golf, I listened to it on the road all the time. And so what I enjoy in a podcast is the ability to get to know someone in a deeper way than you would through pretty much any other medium. Because in a long form conversation, you really not only get to hear good content, but you get to hear the person's heart and a lot of where they're coming from. And so what I wanted to create with our show was a place where we could do long form, non-chronological, conversational type interviews that really share not only the impact someone's having in their life, but their heart behind it. And that's been a really fun journey to kind of learn what that looks like. I mean, there's an original idea, and then as you do it, it shifts and changes and morphs so much throughout the 4+ years of doing it now. So now I would say it's described as a podcast about the process of becoming. And so that means growing into who we want to be, right? And that can happen throughout our entire lives. So it doesn't matter the age or stage. But the core element that ties it all together is living with intentionality, a reason why behind what we're doing. And our kind of mantra is intention in the tension. And that's just to say that life has all these tensions that we face on a daily basis, right? And we have to kind of live in the midst of those, of this side versus this side. And especially today, we see more polarity within the political world or relationships in general, but there's always been a polarity in life. And so we have to balance, and living in the midst of that tension, the best way to do it, in our opinion, is with intention, by having intention in each thing that we do. And so the people that I have on the show are really people that I think are living with intentionality and on purpose, and that they have experiences and stories that are helpful for others to learn from. And that really can be anyone. So it's been a pretty wide range, and it's been a really fun journey. And I'm so grateful for this thing called podcast that we get to do, because it is such a joy to connect and hear from others.
Wow. It really is. We started this as a project, almost a couple years ago now. And it really is, it's really been an interesting experience. So I'm very glad that we decided to do it. But yeah, so you really think that there's polarity politically I don't understand.
Yeah, it's so hard to find, but if you look hard enough,
You
yeah,
gotta look for it. It doesn't just slap you in the face.
yeah,
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, that's funny. You gave me that. That was inspiring to me because I'm thinking like I have so much tension every day,
hmm
just trying to like get through the day
yeah.
with kids at home and everything, and everyone's going through that right now.
Mhm.
And God bless the teachers because they've got kids at home and they're.
Oh man, yeah.
But yeah, so I guess I'm gonna take a new perspective on Tuesday when they're back in class.
Good. Yes, I love it.
I'm just gonna go outside is what I'm gonna do and look.
Yeah. Get some fresh air. Yes.
New perspective.
Yes.
Awesome. So we have I know we have teachers, we have young up and coming potentially entrepreneurs, and sort of a wide range of people that listen to this podcast. Curious, whatever the age, if someone is interested in doing the sorts of things that you do, what advice might you have for them? Young, or what did you say? No age or stage, or
Yeah.
age or
Yeah.
stage, young or otherwise. I know you just said I'm going to write a book, but what would be one thing they could do to get started on that journey? I'm really interested to know how you just wrote a book.
Well, no one just does anything. It takes a lot of time, effort, and blood, sweat, and tears, right? I mean, it was an 18-month journey for me, and I puked out the first draft in 2 to 3 months. But man, was it wretched. It was just a bad piece of writing. So then comes the really unfun work of refining and editing. So it definitely didn't just happen. So for young entrepreneurs or anyone, I think the best advice that I could start with is the key thing that we all have to do is get good at learning how to learn. If you can learn how to learn, there's nothing you can't learn, right? And what's funny and why I appreciate EntreEd and what you guys are about is that education itself does not teach us how to learn. It teaches how to get good grades. It teaches us how to be good at the game of education. And I was great at the game of education, but I wasn't good at learning. And I didn't realize that until halfway through college. And if I could have learned that at a younger age, man, it would have been amazing to see how much more I could have used my education for good and where it would have led me otherwise. So the most important thing is if we can become good learners at a core level, then we're going to become good entrepreneurs, because as an entrepreneur, you have to be constantly learning. You're constantly facing new challenges, obstacles, and problems that need solutions. And so you have to be a good learner to be a good entrepreneur. And I think that's a core competency that's needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I had that experience too. I was great at just memorizing it all and spewing it out on the paper, and then don't know what I just did at like 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
And that's you kind of answered my second part of that question, which is if a teacher is listening, we have lots of educators that listen to this. What advice would you give them to help build that with students?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that we talk a lot about it, EntreEd, about it being an entrepreneurial mindset, but really the entrepreneurial mindset is kind of just being comfortable with uncertainty and the knowing that you're going to have more things to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But that's hard to teach.
Yeah.
So what might you say to a teacher who's like, this sounds really good, Thane? What could I do? What's like some tweaks I might be able to do in my classroom or with my kids that might help them learn how to learn earlier?
Totally. It kind of takes a different, and I'm not a teacher in the sense of in classroom, so I don't experience this on a daily level. And I know there's the part of the issue is the system itself, right? The system itself is so big and large that it isn't as effective as it could be, but it's reaching more people than it often would otherwise. And that's a good thing. There's trade-offs in that. But in a huge, big system that isn't as effective as it could be, how do you tweak it to make it more effective, right? How do you create better young humans as a result of that? And I think part of it is trying to see the student as a human first, right? Because that's a hard thing to do when you have a classroom of 30 to 40 kids or more, and maybe it's one of 10 classrooms you have, or however many that is. It's like a doctor, right? How do you see the patient not just as a number, but a human being? And that's probably the place to start as a teacher. But then within your teaching itself, I think understanding that information retention will not serve the students best, even if the system's set up for it, helps us say, okay, if it's not only about just retaining information for a test, what within this information, what are some of the universal concepts or the things that make us human, or the things that would grow us as a human out of this content or information that I could highlight in the way I present it, or in the assignments I produce for it? How can I structure it in a way that benefits them from a learning standpoint and not a grade standpoint? And that's a tough thing to do because you are within the system of grades, so you have to structure in that way. But we can also use our creative powers. That teachers are incredibly creative people. And so they can just, I think shifting that focus to more leveraging of the creativity can be a really helpful focus or perspective shift in presenting and providing either assignments or the lectures in a way that promotes more learning. Because I think at the end of the day, if as kids, we have a teacher who helps us know that good grades is important, but not as important as learning well. And then providing some of those strategies within it. One of the best books on it was Make It Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. And man, that was so helpful for me, even in college, of, man, these are ways that we psychologically learn better, and that's been, resources like that can help us, especially if you're a teacher, learn different strategies to provide for your students.
I love that. We have, and I'm glad you touched on that, kind of that big system picture, because we have so many, especially the ones we work with, obviously, because we have so many just amazingly creative teachers. And a lot of times, those teachers, we've had some on the podcast that just, for whatever reason, they were fortunate enough to have this like new building, or even if it's not new, they have this great space and they can spread the kids out and they can do all these really creative things. And that unfortunately is less common than the alternative. And it's great for those teachers and kids who have that. But we have teachers that have a very traditional setup, very structured type of school, very traditional, and they're able to go and really be creative with the time they have with their kids and make things that are more experiential and make things that are more project-based and still be able to come up with the grades. But that's hard. And we get that question a lot. I've got this in my curriculum. Where do I squeeze in entrepreneurship? And then when we meet with teachers, we talk and kind of unpack that and say, all right, you don't have to squeeze in this extra entrepreneurship thing. You just take this math lesson and you turn it into an entrepreneurial related math lesson, or you take this, writing lesson and you turn it into, how would I do this on social media? How would I market myself? Or you do a personal brand when you're talking about persuasive writing, those kinds of things. And so it's not easy, but it's something that all teachers can do. So I'm glad that you said that, because it is really hard for some of them. And now I'm seeing it's much harder with, you've got the curriculum and now you're behind a screen. So hopefully it's more soon though.
Yeah. And, I think if we get to like core elements, when I hear you talk about that, I think the thing that comes to my mind is this difference between logic or rationale and creativity or, what's the word? Problem solving thinking in that sense. So this idea of so much of our curriculum is based on logic and rationale, and even in the more creative type subjects like English, like it's more based on grammar often than like creative writing itself. And so how do you maybe infuse creativity into the system of the curriculum is kind of a way, because entrepreneurship takes creativity, it takes problem solving in a way that's thinking outside of the box a lot of times. And I think that's a great focus for teachers, especially because that naturally lends itself to less focus on a grade and more focus on a process.
Yep, that's perfect. That's what we advocate. That's awesome. Yeah, it's really neat to see what happens to kids when it actually shocks them sometimes, especially the older kids, when the teacher like does something really out of the ordinary, or they get a class that's really entrepreneurial and has all these cool, you choose the project or you choose what you want to work on. And some of those kids are just totally freaked out because they're like, what do you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But once they get used to it, teachers and the students find that it's so much more engaging and motivational. And it just kind of the stress level is not even there anymore, even though they're doing things that are completely relevant and will help them in the future. And it's really great to see when that happens. So
I love that.
That's why we're doing the podcast, because we want everybody to know that we're out there as a resource and whatever we can do and we find great people like you that can share your journey and inspire kids and inspire educators. So we love that. So before we start to wrap up, is there anything burning on your soul that you want to share?
I love what you guys are about. And that's why I was excited, I think, to have this conversation because, man, I've been thinking a lot more this year than before, long term, of thinking, how can I have 100-year vision? How can I think about generational impact? And really, that's a lot of what can drive us, especially as there's several generations below us now that are coming up. And we get to think about how can we set them up for success by our own actions. And man, to be able to, for teachers who are listening or educators who are listening, to be able to input or instill some of these concepts into a young person's mind or experience, we talk all the time. My wife and I talk all the time about like teachers that left an impact, and my wife especially remembers several to this day and will always mention them by name. And there's such a lasting impact you can have in that classroom setting. That's so unique and it's underappreciated, but it's so essential. So I just want to encourage those educators and teachers and people out there that are doing that hard work, that it's so important to keep at it and to keep striving to instill some of these lessons of creativity and becoming good at learning that will set these young children or young kids and young humans up for amazing progress ahead in our country and in our world.
That's perfect. Yep. Teachers are really heroes. And I just hope, I wish everybody would just support teachers more.
Yeah.
Whatever you need.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Well, Thane, this has been truly magical. I am so thankful to, I guess, does this count as meeting in person anymore?
Virtually. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing now. Yeah.
It's good to meet you in person. How can folks find you, get in touch with you, learn more about all of the cool things that you have to offer?
Yeah, I'd love to send them to thanemarcus.com. That's kind of the headquarters. That's where I house everything. So you can find everything there, and definitely reach out if something piqued your interest or you had any thoughts of your own. I'd love to hear from you. I'm on the socials at Thane Marcus as well. And yeah, this has been a lot of fun, Toy. I've really enjoyed it. Yeah,
likewise. Maybe I can get you back another time.
Yes. A round two.
Cool plan. We'll see if I do that, if I have these cool guests and I can do a second round, then I don't have to,
Yeah. Makes it easier. Yeah.
I don't have to find anybody. No, yeah. I love meeting new people just like you. It's such a cool thing. So thank you so much for being on and for your time. And I so appreciate you and everything that you've had to share. I know our audience is going to and is loving this right now whenever it's airing.
Well, thank you, Toy. This has been great.
Very grateful to have you.